Some stories are too brutal for Netflix. A silent apartment that became a trap, a friendly grandpa with a secret from 50 years ago, a killer who mailed puzzles to the press, and a city that played jazz to survive the night. If you keep listening, I'll keep it calm and clear. Let's dive into the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer grows up in a house that looks normal from the outside. There are dinners, school days, and long car rides. There are also arguments, doors closing too hard, and weeks where everyone is busy or tired or away. He's a quiet child who often feels unseen. He likes to walk in the woods and find small bones or old jars. He says he is curious about how things work inside. This kind of curiosity is not strange by itself. Many kids love science, but for Jeffrey, the interest is not paired with warmth, rules, or close attention from adults. He learns the habit of being alone. He learns to keep secrets and to shut the door. When a child feels invisible for a long time, the world takes on a different shape. Problems do not look like problems. They look like private puzzles you fix when no one is watching. As he grows into a teenager, Jeffrey drinks. He learns how alcohol can quiet the noise in his head and make people feel easier to control. He tries to hold down routines, school, later work. But the habit of quiet isolation grows stronger. He learns to move through life without questions, without being known. The late 1970s become the first turning point, the first violence. Then there is a long pause. Years that look empty on paper, but are not empty at all. On the surface, he moves. New places, small jobs, a cheap apartment where neighbors do not ask about your business. Inside, his thinking hardens into a pattern. He wants control. He wants company that never leaves. He wants to create a world in one small room where nothing surprises him and nobody says no. It is a terrible wish. And yet, this wish is left alone to grow. He begins to seek out young men, many of them from communities the city already treats like shadows. Immigrants, black men, Asian men, indigenous men, gay men, poor men, boys who slip in and out of clubs and buses, boys whose families are far away or who are too young to even be called men. When a society refuses to see someone, it also refuses to protect them. This is not just Jeffrey's crime. It is also a map of where the city's gaze does not reach. Neighbors at the building on 25th Street do not live in silence. They hear, they smell, they worry. A woman named Glenda, living close by, becomes the conscience of the hallway. She calls the police again and again. She says something is wrong upstairs. She says the smell is not spoiled meat. She says the sound she hears is fear. Many people who call in with worries are told to stop being dramatic. They are told it is nothing. They are told to mind their business. But fear is a compass. When it points, we should look. Inside apartment 213, Jeffrey continues his private system. He invites people in. He makes drinks. He turns up the music. He tries to hold the world still. He pins it to the table with routine. But outside that door, time moves, and it will eventually move through the lock. There is a night in June 1991. Remember this month, because it marks the biggest missed chance. A boy is seen in the street, confused and hurt and not okay. He is young. A group of women are worried and call the police. 2 officers arrive. Jeffrey tells them a story. It's my friend. It's fine. We had a fight. He has had too much to drink. The story is thin and full of holes. It should not stand. But the officers do not look past it. They walk the boy back upstairs. A neighbor pleads with them. She asks for more questions, more time, just a few steps more. But the officers leave. The door closes. Hours later, A life ends that could have been saved. It is not right to name a victim lightly or to repeat pain for effect. It is right to say that the system failed him and that his community knew it. Why does a moment like that happen? Maybe it is prejudice. Maybe it is fatigue. Maybe it is the lazy idea that what happens in certain apartments with certain people is not worth the paperwork. Maybe it is discomfort with queer lives. Maybe it is all of it at once. Whatever the reason, the effect is the same. An open door that should have been shut forever remains open one more night. A month later, the pattern breaks, not because the system wakes up, but because a man fights. He keeps his mind clear long enough to see that the only way out is to run. He plans a small trick. He asks for the bathroom. He watches for the right second. He bolts out the door and onto the street. He finds the police, and he does not give up. He leads them back to the apartment. He insists. He uses the strength that fear sometimes wakes inside us. And the officers this time look around. They open the fridge. They see the photos. The truth can hide in plain sight for a long time, but not forever. When they take Getreu in, the room smells different. Not the smell from the hallway, but the smell of shock, the smell of a lie ending. They begin to ask questions. A story of many years spills out in pieces. He is calm. He answers. He uses short sentences. He talks about control, about fear of being alone, about wanting people to stay. He says it as if he is the only person in the room, the only person who matters. But the real room is larger. It includes families who begin to get phone calls, faces that go pale and then grey as officials say words no parent should hear. It includes neighbours who knew something was wrong and are now proved right. It includes a city that has to face a simple fact. When poor people, queer people, immigrants, and people of colour call out, they must be heard the first time. The trial comes and the courtroom fills. Microphones listen. Cameras stare. Some people want to hear details they can repeat, like a dare at parties. Some want to stare at evil because staring makes them feel safe. If you can name it, you can lock it away. But safety does not come from stares. It comes from systems that work when no one is watching. It comes from a dispatcher connecting a call to an officer who listens. It comes from a landlord who takes a complaint seriously. It comes from a school that notices a lonely boy and refuses to let him disappear. At the trial, the families speak. They try not to break. Some do break. Breaking is human. Anger walks the room like a storm cloud. Grief sits like a stone in the lungs. The law does its job. The sentence is long, and the door on Jeffrey Dahmer's life closes behind him with a final sound. People say justice, and yes, it is something, but it is not a time machine. It cannot hand a son back to his mother or a brother back to his sister. It cannot reach backward into that hallway and make the officers ask more questions. It cannot reach backward into a boy's childhood and give him what he did not get. So what can we do with this story now? We can slow down and take lessons that are not exciting, but are powerful. The first lesson: trust the people who are closest to the noise. If a neighbor calls twice, listen the third time even harder. If a woman says, "I know the smell of fear," believe her. If a teenager looks too young to be where he is, ask his age and wait for a real answer. The second lesson: look at who the system tries not to see. If a person is on the margins, move the margins. Ask yourself, if this person were my child, what would I want the police to do? What would I want the nurse to do? What would I want the judge to do? Now do that for everyone, not just for people who look like you. The third lesson is about silence. Silence is not neutral. in a hallway where something bad grows, every person who says, "It's not my business," is a small piece of the cage. This is not a reason to live in panic. It is a reason to stay awake, to knock on a door, to make a second call, to ask for a supervisor, to learn your neighbor's name. It is easy to make Jeffrey Dahmer into a myth. It is harder and more useful to see him as an outcome. He is the outcome of years of small failures, his own choices first of all, but also the failures around him. A world that gave him places to hide and people to harm without quick consequences. A world that looked at certain boys and decided they were already half invisible. A world that heard a woman's fear and told her she was making a scene. When many small failures add up, tragedy is not a surprise, it is a schedule. There is one more thing to hold on to. Courage can be quiet. Courage can be a neighbor dialing again. Courage can be a young man studying the lock and deciding he will not die in that room. Courage can be a police officer saying, "We are going to look anyway," and stepping past the shrug. Courage can be a judge giving time to a victim's family to breathe. Courage can be a community making new rules for how complaints are handled, and then actually following those rules when the cameras leave. Imagine this story as a house with many rooms. In one room are childhood memories. In another room, alcohol and secrecy. In another room, cruelty. In another room, fear. In another room, the hallway where neighbors stand. And in their hands are phones and notes and a will to protect. In another room is the night of escape. A burst of air, shoes on the stairs, a street light turning someone's face into a clear shape again. And in the last room is the future, which is still mostly empty. That room belongs to us. We choose what we put inside it. Better training, clearer rules, respect for calls from the margins, money for shelters and outreach, time for officers to ask the extra question, grace for people who lived through something terrible and need space to heal. You might ask, was Jeffrey Dahmer born to do this? Or did the world shape him? The truthful answer is unsatisfying, both and neither. He chose every violent act. No sadness or loneliness excuses it. But he also used cracks that were left open. If the cracks had been sealed, his road would have been harder, and some people would still be alive. That is why telling the story matters. Not to relive harm, not to feed a dark hunger for detail, but to study the blueprint of the cracks and seal them one by one. If you walk down a city hallway today and smell something that should not be there, you will remember this story. You will remember that silence is not safety. You will remember the face of a neighbor who was right and not believed. You will remember a boy on a sidewalk in June. You will remember a man who ran. You will remember that one person can finally open a door, but it is so much better if the door never had to be opened at all. In the years after the trial, the city struggles with the mirror. Community leaders hold meetings. Some people argue that the problem was only one man. Others say the problem is larger and include attitudes about race, class, sexuality, and poverty. The right answer is to keep the conversation going until changes become normal. There are reforms, and there is pushback. There are speeches, and there is quiet, practical work by people who will never be on TV. Never forget, the everyday work matters more than the microphone. The quiet person who improves a 911 response rule may save more lives than any true crime series. If you have listened this far, you are part of that quiet work. You are practicing patience and attention. You are giving space to the names behind the headlines. You are agreeing, simply by staying, that the story is about people, not just a single frightening figure. And maybe, The next time something feels wrong, you will be the one to say, "Let's check one more time. Let's end with images, but not gruesome images. See the apartment building at dusk, bricks cooling after a hot day. See window fans turning. See a woman sitting at a small table with a phone, deciding to make one more call. See an officer who is tired but looks twice anyway. See a boy stepping out into a corridor, scared but choosing the door instead of the chair. See the refrigerator, closed and cold, and think not of the worst thing inside it, but of what it means that it had to be opened at all. Years of missed chances piled up into 1 second of truth." Some people will say, "I don't want to think about this before bed." That's fair. This is heavy. But think of the calm power in getting the story right. Think of it as a night walk through your own neighborhood, learning the sounds, learning which lights are broken, learning who needs an extra knock on the door to say hello. True crime for sleep does not have to be a lullaby about evil. It can be a soft voice that says, "Pay attention, you are not alone, your attention matters." And if you are someone who feels invisible, hear this: you are not a shadow. You deserve to be seen and safe. If you feel afraid at home, tell someone, tell a friend, a hotline, a shelter. Keep telling until someone listens. If one door does not open, try another. Your life is not a hallway where fear lives. It is a street where you can choose your direction and people can meet you with light. We are almost done. Before we close, hold the lesson that matters most. Prevention is not dramatic. It is small and steady. It is the neighbor's number in your phone. It is trusting the bad feeling when it will not go away. It is training and budget and patience and the choice to treat every call as if it were your own family. It is seeing the person in front of you, especially if others look away. It is learning the names of the people we lost and treating those names like seeds, not stones, because seeds grow change. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer will always live in the culture. It is already a story retold in documentaries and shows and posts. Sometimes it is told in ways that show too much and care too little. You do not have to accept that version. You can choose the version that keeps respect in the room, that keeps the focus on the victims and the community, that turns darkness into a map for better choices. That is the story you and I just shared. So now, if a door in your life needs to close, close it. If a door needs to open, open it. If a call needs to be made, make it. And if a voice near you says, "Something is wrong," listen as if the whole building depends on it, because it might. CTA. If this calm retelling helped you think more clearly about the case and about how we can protect people before tragedy, please like the video and subscribe. It helps this channel reach more listeners who prefer true crime told with respect and care. I'd love to hear from you. Which moment in this story felt most important to you? The neighbor's calls, the missed chance in June, or the escape that finally ended it? Tell me why in the comments. This is the end of story 1. Next, story 2. John Arthur Getreu. A calm arrest at a quiet house opens a door to murders near Stanford, solved by DNA kept for decades. The morning starts with a trick. An undercover officer approaches the front door and apologizes for a small crash. He says he accidentally hit a car in the driveway and asks if they should exchange insurance information. The homeowner is 74 years old. His name is John Arthur Getreu. He's polite, a bit embarrassed, and he steps outside to look. It takes only moments. Deputies tell him to face the vehicle, place his hands behind his back, and they pat him down. He is guided to the front seat of a police car. He asks about his dog. They say they will take care of the dog. The door closes. The house is still, the street is still, but a long, frozen story begins to move again. He has not been told why he is under arrest, but inside the car, he compliments the deputies on the trick. "Good line for getting me out of the house," he says, with a strange, nervous smile. It sounds almost like he respects the craft. He does not yet know how long the craft of investigators has been shaping this morning. For months, far from his front door, cold case detectives in Santa Clara County had been working a case from the 1970s. They had dusted off old reports, lifted DNA profiles from old evidence, and compared that DNA to information in public genealogy databases. It was a patient kind of work. It was quiet work. It was the opposite of a loud siren or a chase, but it pointed to a name. It pointed to this house. It pointed to this man. When they bring him into the station, they sit him down. A sergeant introduces himself and begins with easy questions. "What is your full name? Have you ever served in the military? Have you ever been arrested?" The answers come calmly. John says he was born in Newark, Ohio. He moved around a lot because his father had a long military career. He lived in West Germany as a teenager. He says he has never been arrested in the United States. Then the sergeant asks about something in Germany. There is a pause. John clears his throat. He says he was arrested there long ago. He says he was accused of murder. It is a hard turn in the interview. The room does not change, but the feeling changes. The sergeant asks for details. John says the victim was the daughter of a chaplain, a 15-year-old girl named Margaret Williams. It was 1963. They met near a youth club. The next day, her body was found on a field near the club. She had been assaulted and strangled. In Germany, the case went to trial. John was found guilty and sent to a juvenile prison. Because of his age at the time, he served about 2/3 of a 10-year sentence. After that, he was released and sent back to the United States. His father picked him up at an airbase. He says he never heard about the case again. For years, this part of his life was just a shadow in his past. The sergeant listens and asks more questions. He moves the conversation forward to California. He asks about Stanford, about the hills west of campus, about places a scout leader might hike. John says he was a scout leader. He hiked many trails with boys. He mentions Half Moon Bay. He says he does not recall the Page Mill Road area. He says he was not in those hills. The sergeant then shows a photo of a young woman. Her face is open and kind. She is smiling in a way that belongs to the early 1970s. The sergeant says she was murdered. He asks if John recognizes her. John says no. He makes a small, uncomfortable joke about her being pretty. He tries to guess that she might have been a college student. The sergeant never said that. The detail slips out like a thread. The young woman in the photo is named Leslie Perloff. In 1973, she was 21 and worked as a law clerk. She drove a 1972 orange Chevrolet Nova. One day, she parked near a gate by Old Page Mill Road to go for a walk. She never came home. Her car was found alone. Later, her body was found in the Stanford Dish area, a hilly open space of trails and grass. A floral scarf was knotted tight around her neck. She had been strangled. Under her fingernails were traces of DNA that had waited for decades to be read. When modern methods developed, when genealogical databases grew, and when detectives reached for a new set of tools, those traces gave up a name. They did not give up a confession. They gave up a name. The sergeant probes carefully. He asks about DNA. He asks how DNA moves from one person to another. John says a few things. Semen, the mouth. He says those are the only two he knows. He says technology is getting good and catching people every day. He tries to sound relaxed, but his answers make the room feel smaller and warmer. The sergeant asks, "What if your DNA is on this young woman? How could it be there?" John says he has no idea. He shakes his head. He says he was not involved. The more he denies, the more another detail slides out. He speaks about these two persons, about the one up on the hill. The sergeant has not said there are two victims in those hills, but there were. A year after Leslie disappeared, in 1974, another young woman vanished near Stanford. Her name was Janet Taylor. She was 21. Her body was found along Sand Hill Road, in the same broader area of trails and hills and open land. She had been assaulted and strangled. The cases were widely known at the time, the kind of cases that leave a mark on a place. They lived for decades in the folders and in the minds of families who would never stop wondering. They lived on in the minds of the officers who worked the first searches and the early interviews. They lived on as a whisper in Stanford stories about not walking alone, about staying safe. For a long time, these cases seemed frozen in that older world, before the internet, before cell phones, before any idea that your family tree online might someday connect to police work. Now the interview is not about the past in Germany, or the scout leader days, or whether anyone bumped a car. It is about a set of facts that sit solid on the table. Leslie's DNA evidence under her fingernails. Later, DNA evidence on a piece of clothing from Janet. The specific places bodies were found. The general area where John worked at the time, near Stanford, as a security guard. He says again and again that he does not recognize faces. He was not in those hills. He never hurt anyone. The sergeant listens. Then another investigator enters the room. The style shifts. The tone gets firmer. The second investigator says they are not trying to find out who did it. They are trying to find out why he did it. To understand the power of that moment, you have to understand what DNA means in a case like this. In the 1970s, DNA profiling did not exist in the way it does now. But investigators saved evidence. They saved clothing. They saved scrapings from under fingernails. They saved what they could tag and bag and store, waiting for science to catch up. Later, forensic analysts built a DNA profile from what was saved. That profile could be compared to a government database if a suspect had a record. But if the suspect did not, the trail went cold again. Then, in the 2010s, another path opened. People used public websites to explore their family trees. They uploaded their DNA to find relatives or learn about their ancestry. Detectives, with legal permission and careful steps, could use those websites too. They were not downloading the whole service. They were looking for a match to a small set of markers. When a distant match appeared, say, a second cousin or a third cousin, the real work began. It was the work of building out a family tree, of seeing lines of cousins, of following marriages and births and migrations, of looking for a person with the right age, the right place, the right life details to fit the facts of the case. It is like solving a maze by starting near the center and tracing back to the start. Step by step, that maze led to the house in Hayward, to the front door, to the quiet man and his dog. Back in the interview room, the pressure is steady. The second investigator says the type of DNA and where it is on the victim leaves no other explanation. He says, "We know you committed this crime." He says, "You must have known this day would come." John gives a half shrug and a tight smile. He says he knew it would. And then he says, "Why did it take so long?" It is a small sentence. but it sounds like the kind of sentence that slips out when a person is tired of waiting for a knock. The investigators try for a confession. They try to open a door by offering a reason, anger, impulse, confusion, anything. They ask him to explain the why, if not the what. They ask about fantasies. They ask about whether he ever thought of harm. He keeps saying no. He keeps saying he has nothing more to say. He mentions 2 girls again, the one on the hill and another. When they press him on why he says 2, he says he must have misunderstood. He says he does not read newspapers. He does not remember the details. He says, if the photo you showed me is that girl, then it is not the other one. It is an odd way to deny knowing anyone. It is as if he is telling the story and not telling the story at the same time. The interview reaches its limit. The investigators finally lay it out. They say, in Germany, a girl ended up dead, and you say you were not there. In California, years later, another girl ended up dead, and you say you were not there, yet your DNA is there. What are the chances? What would you do if you were us? He says there is a brick wall. He says there is nothing more to say. Then he asks for a lawyer. The interview ends. The camera keeps recording a quiet room, a chair, a table, a door that will open again, with a deputy saying it is time to go. The legal process turns. It is not fast and it is not simple, but it moves. The arrest turns into charges. The charges turn into hearings. The hearings turn into a trial. In one case, a jury listens to weeks of evidence and arguments. They look at photos. They listen to experts explain the chain of custody. They listen to DNA specialists explain what a match means, what the probabilities are, and how many steps it took to arrive at a name. They listen to the defense argue about contamination, about memory, about the weight of the past. They weigh it all. In another case, there is a plea. The man at the center gives an answer that is not no. He says guilty. The judge speaks about years and life sentences and what it means to live the rest of your days in a cell. The words feel heavy and formal because they are heavy and formal. The families of Leslie and Janet are present. Their names are spoken in a court. Their lives are honored. And the long waiting of their loved ones finds a kind of ending. Not a complete ending, because grief does not end, but a closing of a chapter that was open for too long. There is another part of the story that matters here, and it is about masks and roles. On the surface, John Arthur Getreu lived a life that seemed ordinary, even helpful. He was a husband and a father. He had a job as a security guard. He volunteered as a scout leader. These are not the marks of a monster in a movie. They are the marks of a neighbor, the guy who waves when you take out the trash, the person you might trust with your kids on a hike. That is why these cases cut so deep. They remind us that evil can hide in plain sight, that the surface is not the whole story, and that kindness can be a costume when someone needs to stand close to the people they want to harm. It is not fair, and it is not the way we want to see the world, but it is part of the truth that true crime forces us to face. There is also the question of time, and time is its own character in this story. Time is the reason the evidence grew old. Time is the reason witnesses forgot small details like the color of a car or the exact bend of a road. Time is the reason families struggled to hold on to hope. But time is also the reason science learned new ways to read what was left behind. Time gave the world a way to extract DNA from an old scarf, from the edge of a nail, from the torn part of underwear that sat in a sealed bag for decades. Time allowed a small group of committed detectives to try again, and then again, until the paths lined up. In a strange twist, the longer the pause, the sharper the story became when it finally moved. When detectives use genealogy to find a suspect, it brings up hard questions. How do we protect privacy while we seek justice? How do we build rules so that powerful tools are used carefully and fairly? These questions matter, and in many places, new policies and court rulings have grown alongside the techniques. But for the families of Leslie and Janet, the debate is not abstract. It is personal. They watched detectives show up year after year with no news or just a small update. They set extra plates at tables on holidays and looked at a chair that stayed empty. They saved letters and school photos and old birthday cards. For them, a match in a database is not a headline. It is a light turning on in a dark hallway. It is the sound of a name spoken in a way that finally fits the facts. It is a chance to say, at last, we know what happened, and we can stop searching for that part of the answer. The undercover trick with the car might sound simple, even silly, but it fit the man they were arresting. He kept to routines. He looked like someone who would step out to check a dent and talk about insurance. Getting him outside safely protected the officers and avoided a scene. It also showed something about the way detectives think. They look for pressure points that do not have to be violent or dramatic. They look for ways to keep people and animals safe. They look for ways to make a complicated task calm. In this case, they cared about the dog too. It is a small detail, but it says a lot. During the interview, there are moments that stick with you. There is the instant when John guesses that the woman in the photo was a college student, even though the sergeant did not say that. There is the odd way he keeps referring to two girls in the hills before anyone else has. There is the half smile and the comment about taking so long. These are not smoking guns on their own. People say strange things when they are nervous. They reach for jokes when they feel the walls closing in. They mix up details. But together, these moments feel like cracks in a wall. Through those cracks, you can glimpse the shape of what is behind the wall. You can see a hint of a story that the person is trying not to say. It is important to remember that this story is not just about a man who denies and investigators who persist. It is about human lives that were short and bright. Leslie was at the start of a career in law. She was smart, driven, and kind. Friends remembered her as someone who cared about fairness and loved a good conversation. Janet had her own dreams, her own plans, her own circle of people who miss her. When you talk about cases like these, you can get lost in the puzzle. Routes driven, maps of trails, times of day, lab reports, chains of custody. But the heart of the puzzle is always the people who were lost. In the end, justice is not an idea. It is a way of standing up for those people in the only way that is left. After the convictions and the plea, after the sentences are read, the man at the center grows older in prison. The calendar turns to another September. News comes that he has died of natural causes at the age of 79. In a way, it is an ordinary ending for a person who did extraordinary harm. But even that ending has a chapter that continues. His DNA profile remains in the state database. Whenever a cold case unit pulls an old box off a shelf and sends a swab to a lab, his profile is there to compare against. If there are other unknowns, if there are other traces, the system will look for his number in the code. It is not an extra punishment. It is simply a way to keep the door open in case his name belongs in the margins of another file. It is one more tool to help another family hear an answer they have needed for years. When you look back, the whole story can be told from several starting points. You can start at a youth club in Germany in 1963, where a teenage boy meets a girl, and hours later, police find her body. You can start in Palo Alto in the early 1970s, on a road by a gate, with an orange nova waiting silently in the sun. You can start in 2018 or 2019 in a lab where a DNA profile appears and a family tree begins to grow on a computer screen. Or you can start on a regular weekday morning in Hayward with a knock at the door and an apology about a car. However you start, you end up in the same place. A room with a camera, a table, and a man who cannot find a way to say the truth. In that room, the silence becomes part of the testimony. There is a lesson here for communities and for us as listeners. The lesson is about patience. Real investigations are not like TV shows. They do not wrap up in an hour. They do not always bring a sudden confession. They often rely on small details that seem boring. A record in a file, a sample stored under the right conditions, a notation of a time on a log sheet. They rely on people who stay on a job long after the first wave of attention has passed. They rely on new tools built by scientists who will never visit the crime scene. They rely on the courage of families who keep answering the phone when a detective calls after 20 years. These stories ask us to hold space for all that work and to respect the slow, steady force of truth. If you walk those hills near Stanford today, the paths are peaceful. Runners pass by with headphones in. Students hike with friends and talk about exams, futures, and plans. The wide dish of the radio telescope still sits in the distance like a giant white bowl against the sky. It is beautiful. It is also full of ghosts if you know where to look. But ghosts are not all that remain. There is also a sense that some promises were kept. Evidence was saved. Cases were not forgotten. People came back to try again. The hills are not only a place of loss. They are a place where voices rose again inside a courtroom and said the names of two young women. Those names were not left behind on a dusty shelf. This is a report, but it is also a story about the tension between how we appear and who we are. A neighbor can be kind and still be dangerous. A long, quiet life can still have dark rooms you never see. And a small, invisible thread, DNA, can be the one thing that connects a victim's last struggle to the person who caused it. In that way, the science is not cold at all. It is a warm hand reaching from the past, pointing with steady fingers. Here, this is what happened. Before we end, I want to ask you something. Do you think the growth of genealogy databases is worth the privacy trade-offs if it means closing cases like these? I'm curious how you feel about that balance. If stories like this kept you listening, please give this a like, drop a comment with your thoughts or theories, and subscribe for more true crime stories told in clear English. This is the end of Story 2. Next, Story 3, The Zodiac. Fog, a parked car, a steady voice on the phone, and letters signed with a crosshair. 4 scenes, many questions, no easy answers. Picture the Northern California map. Small towns hugging the bay, stretches of 2-lane highway, a lake with rocky shores and brown grass. On certain nights, something terrible broke the routine. A parked car, 2 people together, a figure stepping out of darkness, speaking in a low, even voice. And then, afterward, a new message would land on a newsroom desk, stamped with a symbol and a tone that was both mocking and strangely formal. The symbol, circle and cross, looked like a target or a compass with no directions. The writer's name, Zodiac, was part myth, part brand, and it stuck. He claimed attacks, taunted police, and sent ciphers cut into neat blocks of symbols. He promised bombings that never came, explained his motives in chilling, almost theatrical lines, and threatened strangers like a storyteller trying to hold the audience rapt. The effect worked. The Bay Area, already a place of protest and change in the late 1960s, gained a new anxiety. Headlines carried ciphers and ultimatums. The case wasn't only about evidence in a lab, it was also about pressure in the press. But let's step into the scenes themselves, one by one, the way a detective might open old folders and lay photos on the table. A dark stretch of road on a winter night. A parked car. 2 teenagers. Someone approaches. The quiet of the countryside turns into violence in seconds. There are few witnesses, and afterward the scene is more questions than answers. Ballistics to measure, footprints to find, fragments to bag. On paper, it is a cluster of data points. In life, it is an explosion that shatters families and presses officers to work until dawn. It's late 1968, and Northern California is about to learn a new word, Zodiac. Though nobody knows it yet, the first ripples have begun. Months pass. A warm night, a local lover's lane. A car pulls in, music on the radio, maybe a tired joke between friends. Then headlights flare behind them. A man steps out and comes up to the window. There is a gun. He fires. It happens fast, and it looks like a senseless attack, until the phone rings not long after. A calm male voice reports the crime as if he were the dispatcher, citing details nobody should know yet. He speaks with control. He hangs up. Now, the newsrooms. Imagine editors sorting morning stacks of mail. Ads, press releases, letters from readers. One envelope is different. Inside are words that feel like a script for a show you wish didn't exist. The writer takes credit for attacks, gives details, and includes a cipher. Rows of symbols arranged like a crossword puzzle, designed by somebody with a grudge. He signs with the crosshair. He names himself. That's the moment a local killer becomes a public figure. A cipher is a dare. It is a message that says, if you are clever, meet me here. One of Zodiac's early ciphers would be cracked, not by a government lab, but by a school teacher and his wife at their kitchen table, pencil in hand, patience and pattern finding in their fingers. That detail still amazes people. Think about it. An ordinary home turns into a small code-breaking room. A couple leans over a page and taps letters in, and soon a hidden message surfaces. The text is disturbing and grandiose. The grammar shakes. The tone is chilling. It is not a confession. It is a performance. Summer again. A lake outside the city, with rolling hills and a shoreline of golden brush. 2 college students rest on a blanket. They watch the water, the clouds. A man approaches wearing a hood with the crosshair symbol and a crude bib or chest piece. It is a costume no one should ever see in real life, like a mask pulled from a nightmare. He speaks evenly, claims he is a prison escapee, asks for keys and money. He binds them with rope. Then the knife comes out. The scene is calculated and slow, like the killer decided that fear itself was part of the script. Yet after the attack, something else. He takes a marker and writes on a victim's car door, dates, places, that symbol again, turning a personal item into a bulletin board. And later, the phones ring once more. The calm voice returns. Now the city. A taxi ride through the grid of San Francisco streets, the patient blinking of traffic lights. A passenger directs the driver to a quiet intersection in a residential neighborhood. The car stops. A shot. The killer takes a piece of the driver's shirt, as if collecting a receipt for the crime. In the days to come, envelopes arrive with proof, fabric sealed inside, making sure no one doubts who wrote this time. The message isn't just I did it, it's I choreograph the chaos and I author the story. This is the shape of the Zodiac. Violence followed by correspondence, as if the pen and the weapon are 2 halves of the same tool. The crimes range from very public to very isolated. But in the letters, the same voice returns, smug, instructive, taunting, oddly polite and cruel. He explains, demands and threatens. He plays with names and symbols. He tells the world he's collecting points. He suggests bombs that would target school buses. Whether those threats were real or not, the paper trail pushes the city toward fear. Parents change routes. Cops saturate corners. Reporters check their mail twice. And still, the shadow that speaks in symbols is always just out of reach. An investigation grows, many investigations actually, because jurisdictions collide. County sheriffs, city police, highway patrol, the state, and at times even federal agents, each hold pieces. Back then, information doesn't travel as instantly as we imagine it should. Memos can get stuck. Radio calls get missed. One department looks at a fingerprint while another studies ballistics from a different case. A third stares down an envelope holding carefully cut paper, counting straight edges and imagining the hands that touched it. The physical evidence is a puzzle that edges close to a picture and then backs away. Ballistics link some scenes. At least one scene is different. A knife instead of a gun, a ritual feel, a handwritten note left behind. Witnesses describe slightly different faces, height, haircut, glasses, or no glasses. Was he overweight, or just wearing a jacket that hung loose? Human memory in stress is a fragile film. You can see the shapes, but the details blur. Investigators know this. They also know it's all they have. And the letters keep coming. One day, a newsroom clerk slits an envelope and a piece of a blood-stained shirt falls to the desk. Another day, the writer describes a crime scene with comfortable specificity, like someone rewatching a movie they directed. On a different morning, a new cipher arrives. To open mail in those years in that city is to flinch, hope for a theatre flyer, fear a manifesto. And yet, the public plays a role here too. Thousands of readers trace those symbols in their morning paper, playing at code-breaking like a crossword puzzle with stakes. People form clubs in their heads. Theories bloom on porches and in bars. Names surface, then get discredited. Officers follow tips and knock on doors, then find their work criticized on editorial pages or in chain letters passed among hobby detectives. The Zodiac becomes more than a person. He becomes a riddle the whole region wants to answer. Let's pause to look at the mind behind the letters. Not the identity, which we do not have, but the style, which we do. Zodiac writes with a posture of control. He narrates himself as clever and uncatchable, scolding police and instructing the public. He likes neatness, block letters, measured lines, a tone that tries to feel superior. His grammar is odd in places, but his intent is always clear. He wants to be read. He is not satisfied to harm. He needs to be seen harming. He needs your attention. He is the rare criminal who tries to design his own myth. And for a while, he succeeds. That makes this case different from many others. Usually, the forensic trail is everything. DNA now, prints then, fibers, tire tracks, trajectories. In this case, the forensic trail matters, but the text trail matters too. Police must become a kind of literary audience, reading tone and syntax, while also testing paper and ink under microscopes. Every envelope is two things at once, evidence and theatre. Now we come to the suspects, carefully. Over the years, several people have been named in private conversations, in public forums, and in articles. Some details line up for one suspect. A job that gave him time at night. A physical resemblance to a composite sketch. A piece of writing that echoes Zodiac's cadence. Another suspect has a history that raises eyebrows. a pattern of behavior that makes detectives lean forward. Maybe even some items at home that look like tools our killer might use. And yet, in each case, an important piece is missing, a hard link that survives a courtroom. Fingerprints here don't match a print there. A DNA snippet says no. A timeline stumbles on a work record or a bus ticket. A witness recants or says what they were sure of years ago doesn't feel as certain now. So we learn to talk about suspects like you, talk about weather forecasts, cautious, conditional. Names are just names until proven. Some are more promising than others, and some are noise. What rises from that mix is not a person, but a profile. Someone comfortable with planning, someone who reads, someone who manipulates order into his chaos, using a straight edge on both paper and people, and someone who can move through public space without drawing attention. No dramatic cloak, no obvious limp, no movie villain glare, just another face in a crowd. One theme that sits at the center of the case is consistency versus chaos. Investigators ask, are all these attacks the work of one person? The letters say yes. The method sometimes says maybe. The weapons change. The environments change. From car windows to lakeside blankets to a taxi's front seat. The only constant is the voice in letters and phone calls, which could mean a single hand or could mean a person who is eager to take credit for more than he did. In real life, cases are not as clean as movies. People copycat. Journalists make leaps to fill space. Fear ties unrelated threads together because fear hates mess. It wants one explanation. The truth may be a cluster shaped like a single shadow. Let's talk about the moment when the public began to push back. Early ciphers get broken. Letters are analyzed for patterns, spelling quirks, repeated phrases, a way of signing off. Amateur sleuths build their own dossiers, some carefully sourced, some wildly imaginative. New technology comes online decades later. Computer-aided code breaking, advanced fingerprint analysis, DNA techniques that, at least in other cases, find answers no lab could see in the 1970s. Hope flares. Headlines promise progress. Then reality returns like a tide going out, revealing sand where you wanted stone. Leads fade, people retire. Files move from active to cold. Still, every so often, something new buzzes through the community. An old cipher solved by a team of codebreakers working across time zones. Another look at a piece of evidence. An official comment that says, "We're reviewing," without saying more. The case lives in those headlines like a heartbeat. An old voice tries to speak from paper, and we lean in again. But the story isn't only about this one offender. It is also about how institutions communicate, how media shape fear, and how a city decides who to trust when trust is expensive. Back then, police departments guarded their case files tightly, sometimes to keep a suspect off balance, sometimes because that's how it had always been done. Newsrooms had to decide, print the letter or hold it back. If they printed it, they could be spreading fear or encouraging copycats. If they didn't, they could miss a piece of evidence that might lead to a tip. Those are real decisions made by real people at real desks, not abstract debates in hindsight. And the killer understood those pressures. He pressed on them like buttons. There's a particular image that sticks with me. A clerk in a newsroom slicing open envelopes with a dull blade while the coffee cools. That small motion, paper against metal, became part of a city's ritual. Not just, what's the news, but what's the message this time? A killer wrote himself into the life of a metropolis, and for a stretch of years, everyone lived with it. What do we learn standing here? staring at pinpoints on an old map and hard lines of text. First, we learn that certainty is rare and precious. It lives at the crossing of physical evidence and verified context. Second, we learn that narrative power matters. The Zodiac didn't only attack bodies, he attacked a story-hungry culture and fed it chapters. Third, we learn humility. With all our advances, a few mysteries stay closed, as if a city has rooms that never unlock, no matter how many keys we cut. But that's not the same as defeat. Cold isn't dead. Cases like this one move not just with time, but with tools and with new eyes. A detail overlooked in the 1970s can surface in a digitized archive today. A cipher that felt hopeless can crack under a modern algorithm. A print smudge that once looked like a smudge can become a useful partial under different light. Families don't forget. Some detectives don't either. And even if the person who called himself Zodiac is long gone, naming the truth still matters. It matters to history. It matters to grieving people who deserve it. It matters because justice is not only a sentence in a courtroom, it is also a sentence in a story where we tell what happened as clearly as we can. Let's return to scenes, briefly, carefully, through the eyes of the survivors and the first responders. A young person lying still, counting breaths, choosing to play dead because moving could mean the end. That's courage. A citizen who sees something odd near a taxi, calls it in, gives what details they can under stress. That's duty. An officer who searches a park with a flashlight beam, slicing the trees, hoping the next step is towards safety, not into an ambush. That's service. When we talk about this case, those people walk with us. The Zodiac wanted to be the center. He never was. The center was always the people who endured him and the people who chased him. There's another truth. Violent crime leaves behind small, practical echoes that newspapers rarely print. Dinner tables with empty seats. Teachers who adjust lessons because a student is suddenly quiet. Partners who learn to sleep with the light on. A community that changes habits at dusk. When you consider those echoes, it changes how you speak about a case. The sensational shrinks. The human grows. So yes, we talk about letters and ciphers, but we also remember the real daily cost. Switch scenes again. A detective's office late at night, stacks of reports, a tape recorder on the desk, a corkboard with thread between pins. A cliché, sure, but useful. The detective runs a finger along a route on a city map. He marks a time. He circles a witness name. He writes a small note. Check phone booth near. Information that, if you were to see it in a TV show, you'd assume would break the case in the next act. In real life, it might go nowhere, or it might matter years later when someone else compares it with a piece of paper from a different file cabinet. That quiet work is the opposite of the killer's theater, and yet it's the only path that leads anywhere. So where does that path lead now? It leads to a shelf where case boxes sit, to labs where evidence is carefully retested, to community rooms where people still meet to discuss the case, to online forums where archivists and coders sift. It leads to classrooms where the story is taught as an example of investigative complexity. It leads to families who, no matter what the headlines say, wake each day and carry on. It leads to police departments that adopt better ways to share information across lines on a map, because they remember when those lines slowed them down. Perhaps you're thinking, was the Zodiac one man, or a myth layered on top of several offenders? You are not alone. Reasonable people disagree. The best answer is careful. The letters point to a single voice. The crimes vary in method. It's possible one person did them all. It's also possible that a killer took credit for more than he did. Police live in those possibilities. So should we. At this point in our report, some viewers want names. I understand the pull. Names feel like answers. But a responsible story isn't a dartboard. It's a ledger. For any person discussed publicly, there are pieces that line up and pieces that do not. If a fingerprint or DNA rules them out, that matters more than a photo that looks similar to a sketch. Sketches are impressions. Lab results are evidence. And evidence is what brings closure that lasts. So the most honest ending for now is an open door, not a slam. The city still stands. The fog still rolls in at night. Headlines move on. Yet the case lingers like an unfinished letter on a reporter's desk. Somewhere among those pages, typed, handwritten, filmed, recorded, are clues that, together, could resolve the outline that has haunted people for decades. If you feel frustrated that it's still unsolved, hold that feeling. It's a sign you care about the truth. One last image, a blank sheet of paper, a pen resting at the top edge, the circle and cross symbol drawn slowly, almost carefully. You can see the hand in your mind, measuring the angles, pressing ink down, reloading the legend. That page will go into an envelope and travel through a world of machines and hands before landing in a newsroom or a police department. Then knives slit it open and the words spill out like a small explosion. That's how he made himself big, by making his voice unavoidable. The story of the Zodiac is also the story of how a community decided to answer, not by surrendering to fear, but by counting facts, comparing notes, watching out for one another, and refusing to give him the last word. And yes, after all this time, something remains. A question hovering over the bay, over the archives, over the living rooms of the families who lost so much, who wrote those letters, who stepped out of the dark and into these scenes, then disappeared. The question is heavy. We carry it together. If you ever find yourself driving a quiet road at night and a crosswalk sign blinks a steady metronome of light, you might feel a flicker of that old anxiety. The point of telling this story isn't to feed that fear. It's to learn what fear tried to hide. That careful work, honest reporting, and community memory win in the end, even if the signature on the last page is still missing. That is the report. That is the shape of the shadow and the people who walked through it. If this deep dive kept you watching, do me a favor. Hit like so more people see it. Subscribe for more true crime told with facts first, and comment below. I want to hear from you. Which single detail in this case feels most important to you? The phone calls, the ciphers, the shirt fragment, or something else entirely? And why? This is the end of story 3. Next, story 4. The Axeman of New Orleans. Thin doors, tools taken from the kitchen, and a letter that made a whole city play jazz through the night. New Orleans in 1918 is a city of sound. Streetcars rattle over tracks. Porch fans hum. Jazz pours out of doorways along dim blocks. The nights are warm and sticky, and windows are open most of the year. Many families live above or behind their small groceries and fruit stands. A shop is a home. A home is a shop. People know each other's names. They also know how thin these doors are, how simple the locks can be, how easy it is to hear the neighbors breathe. This is the setting for a series of night attacks that do not look like a modern mystery at first glance. There is no getaway car roaring away. There is no smoking gun to test. There is no clever device that only one person could own. The pattern is simpler and, in some ways, more frightening. Someone breaks a small panel in a wooden door, usually the back door, reaches in to turn the latch, and walks into a sleeping home. The weapon is often an axe or a razor already inside that home. The attacker leaves the tool behind. The streets return to quiet before sunrise. People do not agree on where the story technically begins. Some point to earlier attacks in nearby cities. Others keep the focus strictly inside New Orleans. But by the summer of 1918, a picture forms. Late hours, mostly working-class blocks. Several victims are owners of small groceries, many of them Italian immigrants or their families. The rooms are close to the sidewalk. The heat stays late. The city paints its porches to keep rot away. Men roll their sleeves. Women pull the shades halfway and hope the little breeze will find them. One night, a family hears a creak they cannot place, and in the morning, a back door shows a rectangle punched through a thin panel. The household axe lies on the kitchen floor as if it rolled from a table. Another night, a neighbor sees a figure move along a fence line, too smooth to be a drunk, too careful to be a thief who wants money. The news columns begin to collect these details. The broken panel, the tool from the house, the late hour, the window that did not wake anyone because the air is always moving anyway. Police do what they can with the tools of that time. They canvass on foot. They ask the usual questions. Who had trouble with you? Who stood outside last week and stared too long? They examine frames, hinges, footprints in soft soil. They note a shoe size and argue about whether it means anything. They look at fingerprints where there is glass, but the scene is mostly wood and paint. They make patrols where people worry the most. Night after night, the patrols move like small islands of light across streets that stay dark between them. In the papers, the tone shifts. At first, these are separate crimes. Then writers thread them together with a nickname. It is not just a criminal anymore. It is a character. Nicknames do that. They knot single stories into a rope. Soon, everyone has heard some version of it. They shop with more eyes than they used to. They shut the back doors earlier. They stack chairs against the inside handle. They leave a lantern on the porch and pray that a pool of light is louder than a lock. The method becomes familiar. A chisel or some tool knocks out a panel. The latch turns. The house opens. An axe lifted from the corner by the wash basin, or a razor from a drawer, becomes the instrument. This habit, using what is in the house, means there is less to carry through the streets. It also means there is almost nothing to trace. The killer moves like a shadow that keeps changing pockets. When he leaves, the tool stays behind, like an insult. I did not need to bring anything. You brought it for me. The pattern has variations. Not every victim runs a grocery, though many do. Not every block is the same. Some scenes sit in busier places. Others are on quieter edges of town. There are times when cutting through the panel does not work, and another window or door gives way first. There are even questions about how many attacks belong to the same hand. Copycats happen whenever the public is frightened and the basic plan is simple. Fear loves to draw circles around different dots and say, look, a shape. Investigators, even then, know that pattern making can help and also mislead. They try to hold both ideas at once. Then, into this cloud of late-night fear, comes a letter to a newspaper. It reads like a performance. It mocks. It names no facts only the criminal could know. It claims to speak for the shadow. The writer, a he, the city assumes, says something that people repeat in every bar and barber chair. On a certain night, anyone playing jazz will be safe. The sentence rolls through New Orleans like thunder. The promise is strange and theatrical. Is it a joke, a dare, a lie? It hardly matters in the moment. The line is catchy, and it lands on a city that already uses music as a kind of weather. On the appointed night, bands play everywhere. Houses pump a piano rhythm until their fingers ache. People who have not danced in years raise their hands and move their feet because moving feels like guarding. Some laugh while they play, some weep. Most do both. The city sounds like a single orchestra. A killer has now written a program note for a concert he never had to attend. The letter may be genuine. It may be someone else altogether. It may be a young man with a flair for drama, adding a paragraph to legends he knows will last. Once printed, the words don't care who wrote them. They spin the same way no matter the hand. Back in the practical rooms, officers keep working. They hang lanterns near porches and ask shopkeepers to fix panels and add bolts. They offer advice. Do not leave axes and razors near doors, even if it is inconvenient. Move tools to the front of the house. Use door braces. Sleep with neighbors. They also argue among themselves. Should the city tell the public everything, or is that giving too much to the shadow who wants to be watched? Should they name a suspect early to calm people down, or wait until they have more than a feeling? In 1918, there is no television briefing with a clean backdrop and a line of clear microphones. There are rooms that smell of ink and sweat, and there are men with notebooks who will try to get everything right on a deadline. Some nights bring survivors who can speak. Their words matter more than any theory, but memories under stress are a fragile film. A face seen by lamplight can melt into another face 2 blocks away. A height estimate shifts with distance. Was he heavyset or wearing a coat that made him look that way? Was he a stranger to the neighborhood or just a man who never had reason to walk that street before? Women and men try to say what they saw. They hope it helps. It does help in the ways that honest testimony always does. It also opens doors to confusion that good detectives have to walk through carefully. A few men are arrested over the course of the fear. Some fit parts of the picture. Some have tempers or past fights or reason to own tools that look too much like the ones sitting in evidence. But no court closes the case on a single clear person who admits what he did and explains how he did it all. Some suspects are weak fits from the start, pulled in by public pressure more than clean facts. Others are stronger for a week, then fall away when a witness loses confidence or a timeline collapses under a train schedule. The idea that the Axeman might be one man for every attack, or a handful across a frantic year, never fully resolves. That unresolved shape becomes part of the legend too. Let's stay with the physical method, because in this case, the method is a kind of signature. The back door panel is thin. Many homes use designs that are easy to repair. A rectangle the size of a hand is the perfect target. A quick hit with a chisel-like tool, maybe a small crowbar, and the panel splinters. A hand reaches in past rough edges to flip a simple latch. Once inside, the instrument of harm is nearby. In a grocery home, an axe sits by the kindling. In a barber's room, a razor waits. The decision to leave the tool at the scene is practical. It avoids walking the streets with a weapon and haunting. People stare at their own things the next morning and think, he used us against us. The city's layout plays a role too. Houses are close. Alleys cut behind shops. Fences sometimes sag. Footsteps can vanish into the hum of a passing streetcar or the tap of a neighbor's hose on a step. The climate keeps people's windows cracked and their sleep light. There is enough noise to cover movement and enough darkness to hide mistakes. And there is, in every summer night, just enough wind to explain a sound you do not want to hear. A story like this one often gets told as if the criminal is the main character. He is not. The center of this narrative is the families who lived next to their work, the neighbors who formed watch groups, the officers who knocked on doors at dawn to say they would try again tonight, and the shopkeepers who repaired doors again and again, because that is what you do when you refuse to leave your block. In those months, people improvise defenses. Some sleep in shifts. Some move their tools to cellars or lock them inside trunks. Some buy dogs. Some keep buckets of sand beneath windows to hear it crunch under feet. Phone calls crisscross streets. Women send children to cousins in other parts of town. Men walk each other home. It is easy, reading old pages, to treat these notes like side details. They are not side details. They are the daily work of staying human when someone tries to break your sense of home. Newspapers play a complicated part. Reporting the truth helps people protect themselves. Repeating rumor grows panic. It is not always clear where the line lies until later. A good reporter in that time is a kind of translator. He listens to police and community leaders and tries to turn the mess into paragraphs the ordinary reader can use. Sometimes he succeeds. Sometimes he feeds the legend without meaning to. The Axeman letter is the best example. Printing it may have saved no one. It may also have given the city the strangest night of shared music it ever heard. The letter becomes a mirror where the city sees both its fear and its voice. Did the Axeman stop because he was caught for something else? Did he leave town? Did the publicity itself push him to move or to fall quiet? No document says for sure. What we do have are human-scale facts. For a time, the pattern ends. People breathe easier. Doors still get repaired, but not for the same reason. The file grows cold. Over decades, writers return to it. Books turn the shadow into chapters. Films reuse the fog. Songs mention the night everyone played. The legend hardens around the few details we know, and creative minds add color where the record is gray. Responsible narration keeps the gray parts gray. It is fair to say the Axeman's method echoed across many scenes. Entry through a broken panel, use of a household tool, attacks during sleep. It is fair to name the heavy impact on Italian-American grocers and their families, while also noting that not every victim came from that group. It is fair to say a letter promised safety to homes with jazz on a particular night, and that the city responded with music. It is not fair to claim that letter was proven to be from the attacker, or that every attack on every list belongs to one person. Where records conflict, we say so. Where witnesses differ, we say that too. The truth here lives in careful lines, not bold strokes. Thinking about how we would handle a case like this today helps us see the past clearly. Modern investigators would swab the handle of the tool for touch DNA. They would lift latent prints with powders and lights not available in 1918. They would test wood fragments from the broken panel. They would build a geospatial map, time, distance, travel routes, and see if any address shows up near the center of many routes home. They would use databases that cross city lines in seconds. They would ask for doorbell camera footage. They would likely find more than their predecessors. They might even have enough to charge and convict. But even today, randomness, caution, and luck can hide a person who refuses to leave a clean trail. There is also the question of motive. Was this about money? No, little was taken. Was it about revenge? The variety of victims argues against a single grudge. Was it about power and fear? That is the answer that explains the letter and the theater of it all. A person who wants to control not just a room, but a city, would be drawn to writing. he would be drawn to telling New Orleans what to play and when. If that is true, then the jazz night was the perfect stage for him. It made him central for one more evening. And yet, that same night also pushed back. People turned fear into music and refused silence. The letter may have wanted to freeze the city in fright. The city danced instead. The Axeman of New Orleans, as a name and a story, survives because it sits at the crossing of three strong American threads: the birth of recorded jazz, the growth of large urban papers, and the limits of early 20th century forensics. Each thread tugs the others tighter. Jazz gives the story a soundtrack people can almost hear when they read. Newspapers give it a footprint that lasts. Forensics leave just enough gaps for wonder and worry to fill. When you mix those ingredients, a myth is almost guaranteed. Myth is not the same as lie. It is a shape people use when details are scarce. So what can we learn that helps us now? We can learn to protect what is simple. Stronger backdoor panels, interior bars, and better storage of tools. We can learn that a community that talks to itself is safer than one that minds only its own porch. We can learn that nicknames can help coordinate attention, but can also turn a man into a monster whose shadow swallows unrelated crimes. We can learn to respect survivors' testimony without forcing it to carry more weight than it should. And we can learn to hold two truths in our hands at once. Fear is loud, and careful work is quiet. Only one of those ever solves a case. Let's go back to the image that opened this story. A rectangle of wood pried from a door, the soft scrape of a latch turning. A footstep across a kitchen's worn boards. That image is plain. There is no villain's cape in it, no dramatic thunderclap on cue. It is just a simple door and a simple tool and a simple choice to harm. In that plainness is the hardest part. The threat is not special. It is basic. That is why the defense must also be basic. Neighbors, locks, light, and attention. And there is another image worth holding. A whole city playing music. After a letter, after a line that tried to turn fear into a schedule, people did what they knew how to do. They played, they laughed, they held each other while they moved. They showed that culture can answer cruelty without becoming it. That night did not catch a criminal. It did not solve a case. But it did say something about who lives here. It said, "We are more than our fear." In the long run, that message can save lives in ways headlines never record. The Axeman remains unsolved in the official sense. The file sits on a shelf where archivists keep history safe, and students still read it when they study how investigators think. Every few years, a writer or a detective pulls the folders again and sees if a new technique or a new question changes the old answers. Sometimes it does, a little, sometimes it does not. As with many cold cases, the best we can do is hold the facts steady, honor the people at the center, and say clearly where the lines end. If you walk New Orleans at night today, you will still hear music. You will still feel the air move in the way it always has. Houses have new locks and alleys have new lights, but the bones of the city are the same. A shadow once walked these streets. The answer to that shadow was never a bigger shadow. It was a stronger community, a humbler kind of courage that repairs doors and keeps watch and knows the names of the people next door. That is not a dramatic ending. It is a true one. The story you just heard is about a person we may never name and a city we will always know. It is about the simplest parts of safety and the oldest parts of fear. It is about how a letter can tempt us to believe we are characters in someone else's play, and how a community can write its own ending anyway. CTA. If this report helped you see the case more clearly, Please like the video, subscribe for weekly calm, fact-first true crime, and comment below. I want to hear from you. Do you think the jazz letter was written by the real attacker, or by someone who used the city's fear to make their own story? Why?